good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody, joined by special returning guest, DC correspondent, Snyder Minutes, Stephen Colbert.
Hi.
You're here. We did call it. You're here for your quarterly, I guess, appearance on the show. It works out to being that way. So
yeah,
we'll pencil in Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom in December.
Do I get to choose between that and Rebel Moon?
Or we could do. I mean, we shouldn't have to specify. I'm sure you'll wind up showing up at the show. We do also have Blue Beetle that I painted over in August.
Well, that's quarterly. Well, I guess that's that's weird. There should be two more.
It's 4 or 5 appearances, I feel like, per year. We're already waiting for whenever the next army, whatever the army of the insert subtitle universe, Dead Universe.
Yeah.
I think we went over this on our. Oh no, I had to think about the title again, Steven. Army of Thieves.
Yeah.
That random but yes, Rebel Moon looks awesome. I didn't even think about talking to you about that today because it just sort of happened. It was like half a trailer. It looks amazing. I think this episode's going to be too long already, so maybe
I will do my best to keep it brief. My only comments on that, really, without going into depth, is just that I always, not that he's the only one that does it, but I really appreciate how often Snyder movies are able to have a behind the scenes reel with green screen and everything be as exciting as an actual trailer, where like you're excited about the film, not just like, it's not just about what ends up in the screen at the end of the day, but you're like, oh, this is still cool even though it's green screen and all this other stuff going on. It like feels like I would watch that with just as much excitement as I would like an actual finished CGI trailer. And I always appreciate that about his approach.
Well, the art of behind the scenes is dying as is, which is super disappointing. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we do get some of that from Zach in general is nice. And I know obviously Netflix knows what they have with Zach's fandom or fan base. So showing as much as possible. And that's the end of the year. So, well, there we go. We might have to have 2 Stephen Colbert appearances near the end of the year to wrap it up.
Wow.
And it's on streaming, so it'll be I'm very curious what the viewership numbers are like given the length of Zach's last 2 films.
Well, apparently it's got the Bird Box window. So, not just Bird Box. There's a handful of things that have, like, their biggest hits have all dropped in that window. And I suspect with this is 90% intuition, but so take it for what it is. But I'm highly confident that they're at least trying to do I don't know about how wide release, but a somewhat wide release theatrical for this also. Not like a limited engagement, but like I think this might be the first Netflix movie to get like the Amazon kind of treatment. And maybe it won't, but I think that if it doesn't, it's because it didn't work out, not because they didn't try.
Well, you are the box office guru. We'll get into that with The Flash, but it's one of the aspects of Glass Onion that I was super disappointed with was it played I can't speak today. It was a phenomenal theatrical experience, and for that 4 days, like the streaming service game in terms of, it's ironic. My father's a trustee in bankruptcy, so I'd love for him, like, the perfect window would be, look at those numbers. Like, what do they actually mean in terms of how much they're spending, how they paying people? But they definitely left money on the table for Glass Onion. Obviously, you look at the success of the first Knives Out film. So yeah, I don't know, because I know Zach likes doing his screenings.
I think it's got more to do with the numbers in the contracts than it does with a desire to have it on, because they pay, like, every budget you see, like, you'll see this, like, oh, this rom-com is getting $150 million budget for Netflix, and that doesn't mean, remember when I said I'm going to keep it short? And people are like freaking out about that, and it's because the budgets for streaming movies do not compare them head to head to a theatrical movie, because theatrical movies, they a bunch of the above the line talent gets residuals from box office, And so built into their contract is based on performance, not just box office, but also home media sales and all sorts of other stuff. They get paid on the back end for that. With streaming, everyone gets a lump sum payment, and so therefore the budget is all rolled up and front loaded into this number. And so as a result, if you're Netflix and you're going to do like Glass Onion, for example, you actually don't want, they're incentivized against having a large box office draw, because the contract has that creates all sorts of problems for them, because that contract isn't designed to pay anyone any percentage of that. And if it was, then they're going to need to renegotiate that on the front end, because then maybe it's not a problem for the maybe that should be the case, but the talent's going to get a way higher stake in it than negotiated originally, and talent wouldn't mind that, but obviously there's a conflict of interest there, that ideally they need to work out a contract that can both allow for people to not get stiffed on the residuals from the streaming, but also benefit from residuals of theatrical, because there's tens or hundreds of millions being left on the table for some of these Netflix releases, I think.
Streaming services in general have seemed to have, I would argue, a negative effect on the box office, specifically of those tentpole films. You look at the release window and lack of success, specifically with the Pixar films that Disney's released. Even regardless of quality, that's a conversation for another time. But films like, well, Encanto was released, you could argue, still in the pandemic window, but even due to critical reception, the routine now, specifically you see with families, is waiting for that thing to pop up on Disney Plus in 45 days.
Oh, and something I haven't thought of before, that I jumped on a thread, or quote tweeted a thread that I saw that made me remember, was when I was a kid, we used to just go, the whole family would just go to the theater on Friday night. We had like a 30 screen multiplex. We'd go there. We wouldn't even look up showtimes. We wouldn't know what was some of our favorite movies we discovered because we just went to the theater on a Friday night or Friday afternoon. Mm-hmm. And like, that's how we found A Knight's Tale. We were like, oh, we don't know what any of this is. And the person at the ticket office was like, oh, it's a satire comedy set in medieval times. We're like, yeah, sure, we'll check that out. And then we ended up getting the DVD and watching it a million times. That would have never, ever, ever happened. And I feel like a lot of that type of movie is like on streaming now. That type of like, let's just go see something we've never heard of, take a roll of the dice. That's a streaming movie nowadays. And all the event movies are in theaters.
I would argue, though, that the quality of the straight to streaming films is not remotely the same as it was for the straight to
possibly
the mid-budget films.
Possibly, but I mean, we saw a lot of garbage also when you just go to the theater. Yes. When you just go to the theater and roll a dice on something you've never seen. Obviously, A Knight's Tale is like, I would never compare that to like
Extraction 2?
Well, I mean, I like Extraction, but I don't know. There's a clear difference there, though, I'd say. But like, Extraction 2 is like a rare, Red Notice would be that was a fine roll the dice on that. That's that type of, but, and I think that's a really fascinating dynamic I never thought of, is that, we don't know what we're going to see. Let's just watch something is all streaming now. People only go to the theater when they know what's coming and they know what they want. Nobody goes to the theater without knowing showtimes and what they want to watch ahead of time. At least I could be wrong, but that's my assessment.
I would say in general it's that, and I think for the most part that's been built in anyways. Like I was mentioning earlier, where people just will wait, and I mean, there's box office we can address, and I think that's the perfect segue into, we were talking about A Knight's Tale and Extraction 2. We are continuing to talk about whatever the heck Sony's Spider-Man universe is. I think, is it not Spunked anymore? Does it have a name? It's SSU. It is now the SSU.
Yeah, because I mean, there was the Sony universe of Marvel, or Sony's Spider-Man universe of Marvel characters.
Marvel characters, yeah.
But SUMP is such a weird acronym that they changed it.
I would argue it's SSMU. I mean, that's fine.
Yeah.
So this trailer originally leaked, and then Sony went, let's just put it out.
Well, did they put out the same one? I think they put out, I saw both of them. I think the green band leaked, and so they just put out the red band, because the red band was far better.
I didn't see the green band. I had seen something had leaked, and so I didn't watch the leaked trailer until it was officially on Sony's website. So what you don't know, if you don't know what we're referring to, Kraven the Hunter, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson, comes out in October. It is the first official R-rated film in the SSU. Technically the first. I mean, Deadpool hasn't joined
the
MCU
first
officially.
Well, this is MCU adjacent at this point, right?
Is it?
Like, well, I mean, with Venom, like they kind of opened that door. So like, how do you? Every Marvel universe is technically MCU adjacent at this point, thanks to No Way Home and
I would
Multiverse of
argue
Madness.
that because that was produced, obviously you and I know, and if you're listening to this, you know that the Spider-Man films have been produced in collaboration with Disney and Marvel Studios. That one Venom scene was the equivalent of giving your younger sibling an unplugged controller to play video games with you because you did not want to let them know that they were actually in control. I guaranteed that's the relationship that Kevin Feige has with Amanda or Amy Pascal and Avi Arad potentially.
Mm-hmm.
So the Red Band trailer, noticeably more violent than we've seen from any of these SSU spunked, it's SSU now, I guess, trailers. There is an uproar, Steven, because Kraven has lion powers. Do you care?
Every time, I'm not going to say that there were no Kraven fans prior to this, because that's just a dumb thing to say with any character. But every time one of these trailers for any character other than like Spider-Man or Batman or Superman comes out, there's this huge contingent of people who are all of a sudden like dedicated to Kraven comic accuracy. And I always have to be careful with this because maybe I'm fully aware that there are like huge pockets of like fandoms on the internet that I'm just like unaware of until something happens. But like,
do you want to light this fire?
None of them. I would be. If I had a gun to my head, I would say none of them have ever cared about comic accuracy with Kraven until about 12 hours ago.
Less than. It's ridiculous. So I'm going to say something super controversial. And if you're a longtime listener of the podcast, this is not something that should be surprising. I'm going to get the prop. This is my favorite version of Spider-Man, period. Spectacular Spider-Man. I think it was phenomenal interpretation of, ironically, Peter's high school years, but managing that balance. I could talk about Spectacular Spider-Man all day long. Greg Weisman, who's produced some of my favorite animated entries, period. Young Justice, Gargoyles. Everything he does gets canceled. Unfortunately.
That's how you know it's good.
It's true, for the most part. I'd say in general, that's true. Well, and his shows were all made prior to when streaming was even a thing, really, outside of the revitalization of Young Justice Phantoms and Outsider seasons 3 and 4. But he made shows during the toy era, which was an entirely different thing. But that version of Kraven the Hunter is introduced as, I would say, the version that general Marvel Comics fans are aware of, where Kraven is the ultimate athlete and hunter of animals. I know that is the version that most people know. It's ironic. I find a connection to this, and one of the films I'm looking forward to near the end of the summer is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, which seems to be sticking to, I would argue, the aesthetic most fans of the general brand are aware of, which is the stuff in New York. Some of my favorite elements of the Turtles have been when they've gone cosmic into space, which typically seems to be something general Turtle fans don't know that they did. And so there have been versions. I'd be shocked because Greg Weisman does not pull stuff out of thin air in terms of adapting a character. It may be a subtle reference to something, but there have genetic modification is one of the archetypes of most of Spider-Man's villains. Regardless of version, like Doc Ock doesn't technically become an actual 8-limbed octopus man or woman. But with the Rhino, with Green Goblin, Hydro Man, Sandman, Rhino, who is teased at the end of this trailer, it would stand to reason that just an athletic man would not be able to be a competent villain for the so-called Spider-Man.
Well, and my familiarity with Kraven is almost exclusively from the 90s Spider-Man the animated series.
Mm-hmm.
But I seem to recall in that he was meta in some way, shape or form, and he's got a very lion inspired visage.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Well, I know they stuck to the Calypso stuff. I'm looking up that. From what I remember from that series, he had some sort of injection
yeah.
that had to do with that. So like you're right. If this is not the way my brain wants to say that had to do with Morbius, but I don't know if that's right.
Well, and it's one of those things where I don't, since he's not he's a Spider-Man villain, and so therefore it's like a sub brand of Spider-Man. You know, Spider-Man and like Batman and Superman, you can't really mess with you can flex the characters a lot, but the origin is kind of like you can't mess with the origin because that's where you could branch out any number of ways from there, but it gets way too far away if you remove that foundation. With the villains, how they get to where they are is less important. Like for example, Joker, you could do 100 different origins for Joker, but the actual character you don't flex as much. Whereas with the hero, you can flex the post origin stuff, but the actual origin is what you don't mess with. It's like a kind of the flip side of that. And so, I don't know. I didn't even think twice about it. I mean, I thought once about it. Maybe I was like, oh, I don't remember if that's exactly how it happened, but I don't really care if it's comic accurate or not. It's close enough. But I'm also not precious about to the way that some people might have been more than 6 hours ago, whatever it was.
I think outside of if that is the hill you're going to die on, with that being the case, I actually really like the fact that it looks fun.
Yeah.
Outside of the first Venom, every other movie in this universe has looked like they have no idea what they're doing, what kind of movie they're making. The vibes I get from the Kraven the Hunter film are like Punisher Warzone.
Yeah.
Like we took the concept, we're going to have fun with it.
It looks a little bit generic, but like the biggest criticism I saw people making was like, oh, it looks like a 2000s comic book movie, which it's one of those like copy paste criticisms that people use as if it means something in and of itself. But it's like, I don't know. I thought Blade was awesome, right? But like the Punisher movies were pretty cool at parts. So that's just because it's dated doesn't mean it's inherently bad. And like arguably it seems, I don't want to say self-aware or like meta in that way, but there are movies that end up that way because they're just kind of generic, and then there's movies that end up that way because they're embracing like kind of what they are. And I think this movie very much knows, based on the trailer at least, what it needs to be, and is just kind of leaning into that. And if it's just a kind of meathead action movie with inspired by a Spider-Man villain, like I'm totally okay with that.
I'm on board for that. I think it looks fun. It'll be very interesting that as they continue to establish this SSU, at some point they're going to need to give us a Spider-Man. I don't know who it's going to be, but regardless, again, if this is what you want to throw your anger at, go ahead, I guess. Like, leave the people alone who made it. Just rage in wherever you choose to outline your anger, but leave the creators alone. At the end of the day, honestly, Aaron Taylor Johnson dives feet first into everything he does. So the fact that they got somebody who can kind of do whatever he wants career-wise, that's optimistic. He's not... If there's a spectrum of actors, I would say Jared Leto is one side, Tom Hardy is the other, and I think Aaron Taylor's somewhere in the middle. So if this is more Venom than Morbius, it's a win for Sony, because Venom made $1 billion.
Yeah.
Right? So
Almost.
At the end of the day, they're making these for money, and if it does that, we may get a Kraven 2, we may not. But yeah, 856, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
Most blockbusters at this point would be dying for that. So let's move into our review of the latest blockbuster, which is The Flash, the second last DCEU movie, or maybe the last. We'll get into it. That's going to be in spoilers. As per usual, there's going to be a general reactions first, and then we will get into spoilers. Time codes for both segments will be listed in the description. Let's get into The Flash. All right, Steven, where do you want to start on generalities?
I don't know. There's so many different things to talk about. I think first off, I'll say I liked it.
Okay.
It's not perfect, but like I think it knew what it was going for, and I think that a lot of the criticisms, while I understand where a lot of them are coming from, there's a lot of what I would characterize as bad faith criticisms that we can dig into later. But under spoilers and other stuff. But I think that I almost don't. It's not a movie that I feel like I want to defend, because I feel like the attacks against it are people came for it with knives out in a way that doesn't really, like, even if it is like that bad, I don't see what justifies this level of like insanity that people are like. I haven't seen people pile on a movie like this since like
Eternals?
Suicide Squad, or no, not even Eternals, or like Eternals and like Ant-Man and the Wasp and Thor. Like the people came after those movies, but there was like it was almost like a not a lighthearted necessarily, but there was almost like, isn't this funny how bad this is? Whereas this is like, I'm seeing like some insanely, like, people are just openly posting like entire scenes from the movie with live commentary and laughing at it, and
that's been a problem on Twitter lately. I don't understand how that works.
It's just a weird level of like vindictiveness and like reveling in, and people are saying like, oh well, it deserves it because they marketed it as the best superhero movie of all time, which all they were doing is leaning into feedback they were getting from critics and audiences in test screenings and fan screenings and cinema. Like people were coming out and saying this is a great movie, and so they were saying, okay, cool, we'll put that in our advertising. Then it's not like I don't know. But without talking about the discourse too much, I'll say I enjoyed it. I thought Ezra Miller was amazing, and the fact that they were playing two characters the whole time. I don't think I've seen two characters interact on that level. Like it's the two main characters of the movie, really. I don't think that's getting much appreciation for the level of like any other movie that's like Parent Trap or anything like that has this whole like, oh, we're going to be on opposite sides of the screen. Someone's back is going to be to the like, but no, these two, they were jabbering and touching and interacting in ways that like was truly alive like the whole time. And I thought the humor, it was like a lot of silly humor, but it fit to me. There's a couple like cringe moments that I don't think necessarily worked, but I think overall it had heart and it really went for what it was going for, and it didn't feel muddied down or bland in any way. And so yeah, I guess I liked it.
So I'll start off with, I'm glad it wasn't just Flashpoint, because there would have been much more criticism, I think, in terms of what it is not and what it is. I would say in general, I think I'm on the same page as you. The performances that Ezra Miller is able to portray with the versions of Barry that we do see, they're very distinct characters. And it allows the opportunity to see the growth that Barry has and would not have had based on the circumstances. A hero is only as good as their origin story. We talked about it earlier. And the updated Flash one that Jeff Johns did come up with for Barry Allen, if you watch the last 9 seasons of The Flash on the CW, you know what that's all about. It's not spoilers. It touched in the marketing, the death of his mother. I had speculated as to things we may not be seeing in the trailers, and I'll get into that into spoilers, whether I was right or I was wrong. But I've seen people comparing this to Across the Spider-Verse. I don't think that's fair. The production crew at Lord and Miller are doing things that no one else is doing. I'm reviewing this movie on its own, regardless of the. I'm not going to get into the Ezra controversy because that should have nothing to do with how I felt about the movie, and I was not thinking about it during the film.
Although there was a couple of parts that made it difficult, which
That's true. We can get into that a little bit later. Ultimately, I think where I was most disappointed is Andy Muschietti's been talking about the visuals. It has continually been an issue where, regardless of stylistic choice, which I know he's discussed, but in general, it's been frustrating that the trend to whether they're completed or they're acceptable at the scale of blockbuster is becoming more and more frustrating and noticeable, specifically when we get into what happens at the end of the film. I think that what was abundantly clear to me, and I know that this film has been in production hell for almost 10 years, is the use of the Flash's powers were quite interesting, but unfortunately, I don't think there's anything wholly original with the use of them. You are at the disadvantage, again, that there's been a show for 10 years doing that, but given the scale of this being a blockbuster, I kind of hope to see something that I would not have thought of on my own. I would say my highest praise goes to, as mentioned already, Ezra's portrayal of these two characters, and that being, and I know we talked about this during, I believe, the second trailer reaction, that is the core of the film, and I'm grateful for that being the case. This film does not get swept up into the multiverses the way it may or may not be marketing itself, which I think is a detriment to what the film's actually about. And I enjoyed Sasha Calle as Kara Zor-El. That version is very different from the CW version, and the reasons for that, I think, are justified in the film's portrayal of that character. I don't think we get enough of her, and we can talk about the future of Supergirl as, if you're listening to this, you know what the upcoming chapter 1 is, or most of the chapter for DCU Gods and Monsters. I think Keaton is good. I found the action that they decided to put that character in laughable. If you are somebody who did watch the original Tim Burton films that he was in, overall, I think it's a fun experience. If it had been a simpler film, I think it could have been great. I'm not going to argue about, we're not going to have a conversation, because I know it's not one you want to participate in, about good versus bad. There are unforced errors, I think, in how the film was constructed. As somebody who was a fan of Ben Affleck's portrayal of Bruce Wayne and Batman, it was fun to see him again, and what ultimately will be his riding out into the sunset as that character, and getting to see any version of the versions of these characters that were introduced, Man of Steel onward, was something I enjoyed, and ultimately, it's ironic because I don't want to talk about the Marvel movies, but this falls onto the, it's good, not great, and that's kind of it. I enjoyed the experience. I agree. I thought it was quite funny, but it just falls into the middle ground, which when they're marketing it the way that they were, I think it doesn't meet expectations. Not that mine were high, but when you're marketing it with that way, I found that to be another unforced error.
Well, and another thing that it was frustrating about a lot of the criticism that I feel like is partially due to marketing, maybe, but also due to audiences. It's very difficult for them to engage with any of this outside of, there's a lot of baggage brought in, and so this is not the first multiverse movie out there, and so there's a lot of assumptions, most of them very cynical, about what multiverse movies are about and what they're trying to do and why certain things happen. And there's a lot of things in this movie that I found to be rather... It's funny because there's a couple ends of the spectrum. There were some things that seemed like they were relatively throwaway, that people put way too much significance on based on what other multiverse movies have done. They elevated certain things beyond fun Easter egg and turned it into something else. And then there's other things in it that were
Easter egg bonanza.
Well, that were, I thought, really heartfelt, good story stuff that people totally missed because they're trained. They're trained to look for member berries, and so when they see stuff, they just assume it's like, oh, that's what they're doing. That's what all these movies do. It's like, no, there's actually something going on there. And so there's a lot, and that's where you talk about like bad faith. I feel like there's a lot of bad faith criticism where there's things this movie does where it's like, oh no, that was actually, there's some artistry behind what, and we could give examples when we get to spoilers, but it's like I feel like there were things going on with the character or with the story or whatever that people either ignored or glossed over or took the most cynical possible interpretation of it instead of saying like, wait, maybe they're actually trying to do something here instead of just cashing in on, this or that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is certainly, there's been the conversation, we talked about it, about justifying the theatrical experience. This is not something I think you get nearly as much from if you're watching it at home, given what was shot on IMAX, what wasn't, but the overall spectacle of seeing one of the Justice League members finally in a feature film where they are the showcase is something that I really appreciated. And I mentioned it already. Having the movie be about Barry was one of my biggest concerns. And getting to see the dichotomy of what happens with Barry when there is no struggle, like the hero's journey in general is to mix my metaphors, Phoenix rise from the ashes like you built from the ground up, and when everything goes your way, how does that define you as a person, as opposed to who is Barry when things one of the worst days of his life, and getting that conversation, even in the minor moments, which again, part of this is in the trailer, but that conversation between Bruce and Barry about what the tragedy that they've experienced has done and how it's affected other people. And that's what I wish the movie focused on. While we do get good performances out of Keaton's Bruce Wayne, and there's a lot I have to say about the use of him in this film, and Sasha Kala, I feel, gets undercut. Michael Shannon is there. I'm not going to be critical of him. I'm a big fan of Michael Shannon, so the fact that he was there. But ultimately, I think what's most disappointing to me is not what the movie tries to do. It's that the amount of people it's trying to please all at the same time, like, it is a perfect amalgamation of everything that's gone wrong with Warner Brothers, where there may or may not be cameos from stuff from the DCEU, and we've been told it's this reset point moving forward.
Right. Well, and then that's another thing too, that like some of this definitely impacted the film itself, but there's a lot of things that are expectations from, I don't know, to even get into the factionalization, but what Snyder fans thought it was going to be or expected it to be or feared it would be, and what people who hate the Snyder stuff wanted it to be, and everyone's leveraging it, and it's a reset, it's not a reset, it's canon to Zack Snyder's Justice League, it's not canon to Zack Snyder's Justice League, it reboots the whole thing, it embraces the whole thing, it's a celebration, it's a condemnation, like it's and all that debate is happening going into it, and then of course, because Gunn is going to be doing something different, they're going to lean into it resets the universe, but like it wasn't necessarily engineered to do any of that, but it makes sense why they lean on that when they talk about what it does. And then all of that is baggage that people bring into it to make an assumption about, the intention of this moment and this scene is to reset the universe. And when you think about something that way, of course you're going to interpret something in the most cynical way possible, because this character moment isn't actually a character moment, it's a mechanism and a corporate takeover of it's like, well, maybe. I'm not going to say it's not, because there's a little bit of that here, but there's some, I think this is one of the better Christina Hodson scripts, I would even argue, in terms of what it does with character stuff, and the stuff that she does the best in this story, I think gets overlooked because people are assuming soulless corporate intent behind the moves. Like, without spoiling the structurally, the movie doesn't actually do as much to the DCEU canon as people might have expected it to, but the plot and the commentary that it has on like the nature of what universes matter is a highly meta commentary on a lot of things that have been going on in this franchise. And I don't think, I'm not cynical about that being the intent or not. I believe that was actually there for character and story motivation, and I think that it does that very effectively. But anybody that goes into it that's not willing to be more open-minded about that, I can see them, and they did. They took that and ran with it as, oh, this is telling us as fans to do X, Y, Z. It's like, no. Let the story be the story. And as you know, as we say with like BVS by the minute all the time, people are so caught up in this argument of whether or not it's good or bad that they're totally missing this. Like, no, there is something going on here that isn't being appreciated.
When is that going to be a shirt? People are swept up with whether it's good or bad. That needs to be your first shirt.
Yeah.
I think it should be. All right. Well, I think we've danced around as much as we can without spoiling anything. So if you have not seen the film yet, Steven and I will be transitioning into full-blown spoilers for the Flash itself, the potential future. So if you do not want to hear that, avoid that. It will be listed in the time codes. All right, Steven, I want to start specifically with the original Dark Knight of feature films. And what was disappointing, I found it interesting yet disappointing at the same time with their analysis of the multiverse and explaining with the spaghetti how things work. There are certain fixed points in time. Being a fan of Doctor Who and a bunch of other time travel stuff, Back to the Future, I like how that's specifically addressed with how that does not work. I thought that was quite fun. But what was disappointing to me was the lack of, and not explanation. It is, of course, great to see Michael Keaton back as this character. We may have had him in other films. We know he would have been in Batgirl. But I think what undercuts the significance of him coming back after 31 years, if I'm doing the math right, I think, right? Was it 92 Dark Knight Returns came out?
I believe so.
Batman Returns, right?
I think so.
Yeah, 92. Mm-hmm. Is that it is... And I may have misunderstood this, and it affects, I think, the kind of story they're able to tell with him, which what I think from a writing standpoint would have been more interesting is that it's not technically the version from the Burton films.
I was going to say, I don't know. I feel like obviously it rides on that nostalgia a lot, but I think the way it's written, you could pluck whatever Batman you want out of any Batman movie and stick it in there and then just alter the relevant catchphrases here and there to fit. Like, it could have been Bale, and instead of saying "let's get nuts," he'd say "it's not who I am on the outs or on the inside."
It's not who I am underneath.
It's what I do that to find. Like, you change that and everything. There's no way. It's like, oh, that doesn't work. No. Like the fact that it's Burton Batman, I don't think matters to the plot at all. It's just another Batman.
I would disagree only because what I talking about the fixed points in reality and like moments that are meant to happen because of fate and what that plays into ultimately in the climax, and we will get there. But I think not synchronicity, that's not the word I want to use, but in the specifically talking about the similarities with the way that his relationship develops with Keaton because of his advanced age. Obviously, if you are watching all of these films through the DCEU, one of the notable things that they did with Ben Affleck's Batman is they automatically put him post/in the Dark Knight Returns era of Batman. He's done it. He's a veteran. This guy's pissed off and angry because of everything he's experienced, the death of a Robin, so on and so forth. And introducing or having Keaton's Batman also be a Batman who has had a history just based on Keaton's age. And we get brief conversation about things may have worked and the utopia, and there's a small Joker reference, and of course he says the lines. But the fact that there's not really any exploration into what his life has been, not being Batman. Visually, obviously, we do see that with him being a hermit. But I think this goes to something that I am looking forward to with the DCU version of that is relatively recently, we had this, Batman 89, which was a continuation of what I guess a variant or a variable version of the multiverse where he was never recast. You would have to, the continuity of that is insane, and I don't want to get into that, but with this character just being a face of a Batman we know, I think that undercuts the value of having somebody who, timeline-wise, because of Keaton's age, had been Batman potentially for even longer than Ben Affleck's. And what does that mean? Like, what wisdom is he able to impart onto Barry? Like, that is a different relationship. It's almost like a grandparent as opposed to like a cool older brother that I know Barry secretly wants to have with Batfleck. So he's fun, and of course it's cool to see Ben Affleck do that, but ultimately I think it is just as shallow as the catchphrases he does reference, which is disappointing because he's in the film for at least a good third when we do get to meet him.
Yeah, I've never been as precious about, and I think we talked about this before. I've never been as precious about the Keaton version. Like, that's never. I've seen the movies a few times and like them, but like he's never been a major cornerstone of my my Batman appreciation. But I don't know. I feel like it's one of those things where the marketing, I wonder how much that set, like, because they couldn't market it as much on Ezra, they were focusing a lot on Keaton and on Supergirl, and how much expectations were, because really functionally he's just kind of a not a plot device, but I mean, like I said, I think you could have, it didn't have to be that version. It didn't have to be Keaton's Batman.
Do you think it would have been better with a Thomas Wayne? Which would have been obviously more Flashpoint based.
I don't know about better. I think that I understand why they would go with Keaton instead. I think obviously fans of the comic are going to always want it to be Thomas. And I think that would be cool. I think that I think it would have been super cool to get Jeffrey Dean Morgan. Yeah, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Thomas Wayne would have been awesome. But there's no, like, this is marketing the Flash starring Ezra Miller is already hard enough, right? So how do you, so you get, okay, Ben Affleck's in there, okay, that's someone people know. Sasha Calle, no, that's not gonna, fill seats. Not because she's not great, but like it's just not a known draw. And Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Thomas Wayne Batman is a really cool thing that maybe if like the DCEU stuff had been stronger and like Batfleck was like more popular, the idea of like his dad being Batman would have been a bigger draw. But the universe is such a mess that like that's not going to necessarily put butts in seats either. So I can understand why they'd say, you know what, functionally it doesn't have to be Thomas Wayne. We can do this other thing. I can appreciate why they did that, and I don't think it's an invalid way to do it. But I don't know the way the story is written. I don't think there's any obvious reason why it has to be Burton's Batman and nobody else.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's even comes down to like him being the one that explained the whole spaghetti thing, which it's Batman, so he can divulge knowledge of anything, and I'm not gonna be like, what, Batman, how do you know that? That's not something you should know. But like that, like if you're talking about delivering exposition, why does Burton's Batman know the intricacies of how the multiverse works?
He's certainly the smartest he's ever been canonically, even if he is from the
and it wasn't
Batman
even,
and then the Returns era.
He wasn't even speculating. He's just like, oh no, the universe works like spaghetti. Here's a stiff piece bending away. Here's a whole like, how do you, like, dude, you have no idea what you're talking about, or maybe he does because he's Batman, right? So
because he's Batman, yeah.
And so that's a little bit of like, I can go both ways on that, where sometimes writing is good because it's just so good that you can't deny how well it lays something out. And sometimes it's good because it's smart and it knows, you know what? We'll just have Batman deliver some exposition here that saves us time and effort of having to explain it a different way. And sometimes, you know, you're gonna have some of both in any script. And if you're gonna cut anywhere, I'm glad that they said, you know what, let's just give a single scene of exposition to the smartest person in the room and have them explain the multiverse. And let's not do some big flat, like, we've had enough multiverse movies. We don't need to have them go on a journey of discovery about what the multiverse is. Audiences know this stuff. Let's just lay it out there and move on. And I think that was economical. He's a character it makes sense to give it to. Maybe if Ray Fisher's Cyborg had been in this movie, it would have been more appropriate for him to say. But, you know.
Oh, let's not go there, Steven. Let's not go there. Obviously, Cyborg's important. And, like, I appreciate changes that they did make. And it's one of the aspects of watching this film that if you are in the know and you know what's been going on, it is, of course, from a business standpoint, why it's not a skinny Henry Cavill, why Cyborg's not in the movie, why it's not Thomas Wayne. And even after saying all those things and being a fan of Zack's trilogy and some of the... I know there's a couple listeners particularly who want me to do a DC EU tier ranking list. I'm waiting till... I almost called it Atlantis Man. Aquaman 2 to officially do that. I will do that at the end of the year. But the fact that with all of this baggage, it is still a fun, entertaining movie with some we've both mentioned the humor. It's quite funny. I thought Ron Livingston having to step into the Henry Allen role was really, really great. I'm a big fan of the Crudup, so the fact that he was not in the movie was something I was a little hesitant about. But I think
Livingston did a good job, and so this is not a slight against him, but I definitely missed Crudup. Every time he was on the screen, I felt bad that I was disappointed with someone who's doing a perfectly fine job in the role. It's not a knock against him at all. It's just after that, like, you could do anything you want, man. Like, after getting him in Zack Snyder's Justice League,
curse you, the morning show,
right?
Why'd you do this to us?
It's hard to see any version of that character that's not played by Crudup and be as excited about it. Which is, it's just an unfortunate one of the many external forces conspiring against this movie.
I thought that if I'm mispronouncing this, I apologize, but Mirabelle Verdu as Nora crushed it. That relationship is so vital, and we talked about the origins of Barry. With the death of Nora, my brain was just in CW mode. I'm like, no, that's his daughter. No, it's also his mom. That connection is so important, and what that means for the Flash. That if those scenes, and they also cast the Ian Lowe who plays young Ezra or young Barry, and if those scenes don't work, the whole movie falls apart. And it's something that Andy Muschietti has done, particularly in the two It films when casting young adults or children actors. That if you can't manage the emotional moments and you're not invested in the character, that this spectacle is useless. And we can get maybe into the spectacle because I've also seen you tweet about this, but that for me is what holds up the film as being something other than just another blockbuster. I know I've been seeming kind of up and down on the film, and that is kind of the way that I feel about it. But being a fan of The Flash in general, I really liked particularly the growth we've seen from like DCEU's Ezra / Barry, this character who has matured, who was just kind of doing nothing. And at the same time, the history that it does add with the events of 2013 being when he got his powers, and the effect, another character who was around at the time of the Kryptonian invasion. Like, regardless on if there are people who are going to argue whether it connects or not, in my mind, the fact that it added more relevant history to the pre-Man of Steel era is something I appreciate, because you want to talk about cynical boardroom execs, it would have been very easy for the movie to start and be like, nah, we're doing something else. Like, we don't want to use any of the people. We're going to have cut off Superman heads or a very poorly rendered Henry Cavill, which may or may not happen. I mean, it does. Everyone's poorly rendered. Or it's an aesthetic choice. But in doing that, you do to some degree get, and we talked about this after the Super Bowl trailer, you do sort of get a soft ending to the DCEU versions that we did know. And for that, I'm grateful, because as somebody who doesn't like endings, doesn't like cancellations, talked about the shows already, I'm glad that there is some sort of finality, whether or not the reset that we don't get, in my opinion, is as drastic as we're expecting moving forward with Waller and everything. Obviously, it's going to be confusing, and quite frankly, I don't know if you want to get into this, Steven. The fact that it's not a hard reset and we're recasting everybody, that to me is frustrating.
Yeah,
it's so much simpler.
I'm willing to wait and see what happens, and we'll defend to an extent, like, because we don't. Let's.
Because, like, to talk about Flashpoint, sorry to cut you off.
No.
There's no, like, event. It's we're in full spoilers. Yeah. He changes things that causes the timeline we see, and then the different minor thing he changes, which I did like how they changed it, is he moves a can from one shelf to the other, right? Resulting in things we're not sure of. It is hilarious that now George Clooney is back as Batman. That was hilarious. I found that very comical. But as somebody who likes teasing and connecting, we don't know if Ezra's coming back. In my head, the simplicity, and I'm sure we're going to get into it. Sorry, this is long-winded, but the fact that there has been confusion for 7 years now, I guess 6, if you want to go back to theatrical Justice League, in what the heck this universe is doing, the Flash doesn't help.
Yeah. Well, and it's frustrating because I think a clean reboot would be great. I understand, like, there's so many different ways that it could go, and so I'm trying to find the cleanest way without following all the threads first. But, like, let's say hypothetically James Gunn wants to do a Crisis on Infinite Earths or Kingdom Come or whatever for, like, his first Justice League, or there's the multiverse is a factor, and it brings in, who knows, Affleck, who knows, Cavill.
Welcome to Steven's Speculation Hour.
That is something that, like, if the universe takes off and is, like, doing well, I don't know why James Gunn wouldn't want to do something with that. But the problem is that there is so much outside of these stories going on, with hashtag campaigns from pro-Snyderverse, anti-Snyderverse, reboot, don't reboot, keep this character, get rid of that character, and then he's doing something that's kind of in the middle. In today's day and age, why not have, we already have, we had multiple Batmans on the screen with this movie, and we're going to have multiple Batmans going on with the Reevesverse and all this stuff. So it is not a ludicrous idea to imagine multiple versions of these characters culminating later on. The problem is you can't set that expectation when you announce chapter 1, because it's like such a the fact that we can't just let these movies happen, and the marketing and the announcement of the slate is like a part of the experience of them, and people are hating on this movie because it goes nowhere. Well, how do they know it goes nowhere? Well, because he had to make an announcement. Why did he have to make an announcement? Because they had to know where it's going. Well, where it's going is a spoiler. Well, then he's got to give a partial picture of where it's going, and that partial picture means suggesting that this goes nowhere. But what if it does go? Like there's no, everybody's screwed. The fans don't get to know. The fans are assuming they know everything, but they don't. Definitively, they don't know everything. We know that there's more movies in Chapter 1 that haven't been announced. I'm not saying one of them is a surprise, backdoor, bring back Henry Cavill movie. I'm just saying, if it was, Gunn couldn't and wouldn't say that. He's constrained from telling people everything. He could just give his whole plan to everybody now and maybe alleviate some fears, but then you ruin the plan in doing so. So it's like instead it's just everybody's angry about everything, and the only way to make them not angry about everything is to spoil and ruin everything, and maybe that
That's
wouldn't
true.
even make them
Yeah.
stop being angry anyway. It's like who,
That's my secret, Steven. I'm
yeah,
always
and
angry.
so it's I without defending or even having a picking sides in it, I get why it's a mess, and there's no winning, and like Gunn needs to just stay off Twitter and make movies, and then it'll either prove him right or prove him wrong. But like Twitter is not where, or not even Twitter, but it's like the discourse is not going to solve any of this. There's no talking about any of what is this and why and where is it going and where will it end up and what they should or shouldn't have done. That there is no end to that discussion that is productive for anybody at resolving any of this.
I think that's completely fair. It's certainly not the the discourse around it is certainly not what affects the bottom line, and clearly this didn't do very well, whether that was specifically by people who were anti, pro, whatever. Um there was kind of no winning in terms of how to market this, like you mentioned, because of everything that's gone on that has nothing to actually do with the actual film itself. What I want to get into, and you may not want to talk about, and that's fine. Have you read Supergirl World of Tomorrow
I
yet?
have not.
It's
I've
very good.
heard from multiple people that it's very good, and it is like it is on my try to check this out when if I get a chance list, which is a long
Oh,
list.
it never ends. It's like TV shows
So
now.
I don't want to say it's on like I went to order it once and it was sold out, and I was like, you know what, I'm not going to get to this immediately anyway. So it's like
Hmm.
it's more than a casual interest, but I've heard that it's amazing, and I've heard the fact that they just announced like this is the movie is a very smart decision, and I heard that from people who I trust. So
Sure. Well, the reason I brought it up is because, and this goes back to the actual Flash film itself. I liked the fact that we get to see in almost animalistic Kryptonian, somebody who was there as a young woman, which is part of the canon of Supergirl's origin story. She doesn't leave as a wee babe. And the fact that just full of rage and anger because of the way she's been treated, and the fact that it's the hope that Barry provides somebody of the House of L. Like, I love that stuff. I think in terms of, and it's one of the elements that I liked most about Batman versus Superman, which is like you get the broken character. How do they get back to the way we know they're supposed to be? That ultimately, that's the arc that I think a lot of people just have to miss. Um, if only they could analyze the movie minute by minute,
yeah,
Steven.
I have no idea
How,
how they
if
could. Yeah,
only that take a lot of time and several thousand minutes. But it would be if, and again, I don't want. I would be really disappointed with what we got from Sasha if she does not get to do World of Tomorrow.
yeah,
Because what the benefit of the story is, without getting into spoilers, is that the journey we get to see these characters on, it's extremely cosmic, and we know that James Gunn likes space. That's not a shot at all. Clearly, it's an aesthetic he likes to work with, because typically when things are set earthbound, there are limits to what you can do. And the variety of the storytelling is so interesting. And one of the things I think you'll appreciate most is there is a character who is essentially internal monologuing throughout the entire story. And so you automatically are getting a perspective from one character, and then getting to see in the written or in the drawn page what is happening in a different perspective, because it's the objective perspective that the artist is presenting, because you get to see both characters, but it allows to also tell the origin story of Supergirl without being, well, I landed on Earth in Act 1, and then I looked around for my cousin Kal-El for most of 30 minutes, and then I found out that he's blah blah, like a more typical plotted out structured story, and getting to explore an avenue of the DC universe in general that we haven't seen. I think could be really awesome, and I'm very, very much looking forward to the film now. And as even though you brought it up how we're going to have the Reevesverse and we're going to have the Elseworlds, I think given, and I'm not saying it's right, but in making the DC universe chapter 1, at least Gods and Monsters, the parts that we do have, simpler in its understanding, I think, and also it's one of the things James talked about, just making good films. If you have, obviously, if you're going to, with Superman, it's Superman. We know that's why Superman Legacy is going to be the first real film out of the gate. But in having, I guess I'm sort of talking around, it's a no-win scenario for Supergirl as well, because now you've given us one who we get to see die a bunch of times. I really did like that aspect. Like, because of everything the Barrys have done, this is set. This has to happen. And it's a result of what they do. We'll get back to what I was rambling about later, but because I don't want to lose this point. How did you feel that ultimately the villain of the movie is just another Barry?
I thought that was really smart, because in the way that the structure of the movie and the nature of the multiple Barrys allows a much more multi-dimensional character arc than we can normally get in any of these, because you get to see, it's obviously different versions of him, but it is him at different ages, and so you're able to see how the actual arc, but then also tangential arcs that then feed back on, like, for example, the moment when he was like, how dare you do that to whatever the stuffed animal was, and the monkey, whatever the name of it was, but he was like well,
monkey named Monkey.
Yeah, he's like, why are you so upset about it? Mom gave us hundreds of monkeys. And it's like, oh, because he only had the one. But that doesn't just say the thing about the monkey. It says like, oh, this entire character doesn't appreciate what he has because he takes it for granted. And so that's where that character breaks. That's a different strand of spaghetti, right? That goes off in a different direction. And so that doesn't inform who Barry is, but it does inform, oh, that's why that single monkey was so important to him. And you can tell now, oh wait, this has been bothering him the entire time because that's the only one he ever got from his mom. And so it's that type of thing where it's like, oh wow, it adds a much more layered and dimensional approach to Barry's journey. But that's going back to one of those other things though, that you see people upset or mad about, like how much screen time Zod had or any of this other stuff, or how thin of a villain he was. But like, he was never the villain in the first place. But how do you market that though? Like, Michael Shannon is back as Zod as the villain, but he's not. But you can't market that Barry is the villain, and you can't even Dark Flash. Like, even if you like, you can't. There's, I don't know. There's like no.
Were you gonna say you can't reverse Flash? Because that was something that I thought they were hiding from us, because there had been the rumors about a dark, quote unquote, dark Flash, but it's one of the aspects of the origin story that I found interesting. They didn't really bother touching on is who killed her, right? Like, I guess to some degree the film presents as like it's just a robbery.
Yeah, but and Muschietti is now saying though, and who knows if this even gets a sequel, but he's saying that he likes the idea, or he would like to explore Reverse Flash, and even says that Reverse Flash killed his mom, like in a future movie. So I don't know how you do that now after having already told this story, but the fact that it's top of mind to him, and the fact that he specifically navigated around it in this telling of the story, makes me very curious to know. That tells me that he has a specific story in mind for how he would do that. And I'm curious about how he would, in the same way that he changed Flashpoint to tell this one, I'm curious how he would change other aspects of Flashpoint to tell that story without it being a retread of this one.
Well, one of the aspects that's been fun that I know the TV show recently did, if not, I think it was season 8, which was a reverse Flashpoint. where you put Barry in someone else's universe. Like the point of change was done by Earbard Thawne. And unbeknownst to Barry, things are slowly changing around him. So it was almost done more in a mysterious way. But
interesting.
Yeah, I think that perspective on giving, when the focus is already different Barrys, and having a third one ultimately be what causes the conflict, fits in with everything we learn about the character all the way through. Right? Like, and that's the specific reason we get to see that almost mental break with young Barry, in terms of he's getting blades, and like it's one of the character attributes where like never wanting to give up ultimately could have led down a horrible path.
Well, and there's also I think it was almost on the nose, but I guess it wasn't explicitly stated. There's a big sort of neurodivergence or kind of autism spectrum commentary too, or I don't know if it's a commentary, but acknowledgement about the character, about like the way they present him with like the math problem, and being frustrated by the fact that there's so many solutions, and the fixation and the compulsion, and his mom having to say like sometimes there's not an answer, and learning to detach and learning to contextualize and like remove himself from that, I think is such a it's all kind of the opposite of the story that I don't know, and who knows how they're going to do it in like the Spider-Verse, because that's relatively similar, but the hero finding a way to make it work is such a normal kind of way to do this. And so I thought it was pretty bold for them to say like, no, this is what happens here. And and it's not that the lesson isn't that we can't save it. The lesson is that the effort to save it is going to doom others. So we're no longer talking about saving this universe. We're talking about saving all the other ones by not stirring the spaghetti anymore.
So that's a perfect segue into, so we don't explore the other universes, but we just get to see balls of other ones. So I'm curious, did you shout into the heavens when we saw Nicolas Cage fighting a giant spider? Because
I knew that was coming. So it was exciting, but I was not surprised by it. And I'd seen a leak. I knew it was in there, but then also I had seen someone posted it was one of the few leaks that I saw pasted all over my timeline before seeing it, because that's just a thing that we find acceptable to do now, I guess. But yeah. I did appreciate it though. I was not overall offended by the cameos. Really, I can understand why people are cautious about that, but it's such a weird movie for people to like put their foot down on, like, after all the stuff we've been through, for everyone to be like, this is unacceptable to do this, is such a weird.
I think what disappointed me about it, and this is not a shot, it's just in terms of budget, the Flashes, or the Crisis on Infinite Earths on the CW Arrowverse, managed to get a couple notable people to actually interact. They already had Brendan Routh, so they're like, hey, want to be Superman as well? And he went, yeah. And then we flew in Kevin Conroy to Vancouver, and that was kind of it. I guess they flew Black Lightning up. But outside of that, it was like you had them physically there. And the fact that it's just, we talked about member berries, it's just, hey, look at stuff.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. Like, that is the bare minimum for what
I think that's what's weird too, though, because like, look at the way people are criticizing it as like Weekend at Bernie's CGI zombie puppets or whatever. But like, so you look at the number of characters that they've got, and none of them they're not plot relevant. They didn't have lines. They didn't interact. It was just saying these guys are out there. And so maybe it is member berries to an extent, but also it is relevant to the plot in that those are other universes. So they could present other universes with no noticeable faces on it, or they can present universes with known faces on it. Well, it just so happens that some of the most iconic known faces they can put on that happen to be people that are no longer with us. They're not going to get.
Oh, I don't mind the
They're not gonna
CGI.
get-
I just think it would have been better to use footage from their things and just edit that.
Yeah, maybe. But I think that another part of that though is that the aesthetic had already been established from the first time he went back, and in that one the first time he went into the Chrono Bowl they were showing the family and all the other stuff from the movie, and so they could have chosen a different aesthetic, and I think that part of the CGI criticisms comes from the fact that they chose an aesthetic that, especially in low contrast or low textured cam rips, looks like video game graphics. I don't think it looked like that as much on the big screen at all, but out of context, it looks like it's not complete. When I don't think like it's a weird the whole completeness criticism is weird to me specifically because it implies that the completed version of this, all of those cameos are photorealistic, and that's weird because like it's clearly not going for a photorealistic look. They even took the actual footage of Henry Cavill and made it look CGI in order to fit into this whole thing. So when people are, I don't know, it's such a, the issue that I think is there, the best thing they probably could have done to avoid that kind of confusion or criticism with the CGI would have been to add an effect more similar to like Barry breaking through the Speed Force in BVS or something. Like add more particles around it or something to make it clear that this was a tear in reality or something like that, as opposed to like a hazy bubble with these guys on the other side. I am not really passionate about criticizing the way that looked. Though I understand why people were confused, and I think it's important to note that like it very much is a stylistic choice. And I can find some nitpicking with why did you choose a look that is so close to something that looks like unfinished CGI, I guess. But I don't know why people care about it so much.
I think I agree that, I mean, Andy's talked about it, and people are going to be critical of what they're going to be critical of. Unfortunately, there's going to be sentiment that it looks like it's bad, but ultimately it is subjective in terms of whether, because again, you're right, not seeing these models in high res, I would argue most theaters that you're going to see this in aren't projecting it in 4K. So you're not really getting the truest version of it until we watch it at home, which is ironic after what I said about the spectacle of this. I think the style choice is certainly an interesting one, but given how most blockbusters leading up to this point recently, it's whether they're unfinished or whether it's you're running out of time, or everyone says that's fine, or you're not given enough time to do the thing that they want you to do, which has become abundantly clear on the other side of the fence with the other studio. That in terms of style, I think there could have been a happier middle ground. You're right, and it's something I had not considered, which is every time we're in the Chrono Bowl, it's this almost like stop motion covering
I want to compare it to The Simpsons when Homer went into that, like, I don't know if I don't remember what the episode was, but he goes into this. He becomes. Is that what it is? Vision? When it becomes like a 3D, like bitmap, like that's whenever I think about it, I kind of think of that happening.
He's on a vision quest or something, is he not?
Is it like when he eats the pepper? Is that what it was?
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I equate it to. Is like, oh no, it's just that's there. He's seeing a different kind of form of reality. But if you don't notice, because you don't notice it as much the first time he goes in, because it's not, because you're not looking for the member berries, right? It's like contextually it's not there.
True.
And then also a lot of people only saw the cameos, or first saw the cameos like on social media in this out of context way that's like, look at this bad deep fake. And it's like, it's not a bad deep fake. It's stylized in that way. And when you remove the texture, it looks bad, but I'm not going to say that like there are probably other styles they could have chosen that would have been more obvious that that's what they were doing.
I kind of wish, and I know it's just more so preference, and that's all I'm saying. Preference. I mean, it's two people's opinions, but if we had seen universes just animated
Yeah, or like
based,
what they
so you
did in
get just a bunch of
Spider-Verse.
different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think because like Spider-Verse, every universe has its own animation, and so it's very distinct about what's
Yeah,
what. And so it's a good example of like
yeah,
where
like
this is a little bit homogenized that might have hurt it.
well, and regardless of if it's a style choice, if you use footage we've seen in a cheeky way, like take a shot of Christopher Reeve turning over, add some light in a corner,
Yeah.
like something's
Although I don't
happening,
think
like
that would have
it's
absolved it from the kind of criticism that it's getting, though. People would have
no,
said well, they would have criticized it even. I don't know. I think that could have even gotten.
it's true.
And when you get to the cameos, all they do is repurpose old footage. It's like okay, they're
It's true. Well, in my humble opinion, I'd rather that than trudging out an actual CGI version of it of somebody who's passed away. But that's
yeah.
just
No, I appreciate that.
you know what I mean. It's the
I
Tarkin
think
effect.
one other thing. I don't know how much it impacts this scene specifically, but I did write why the Flash looks so weird for ScreenRant.com. And one of the overarching things that hasn't come up that I think largely impacts a lot of VFX, including the Chrono Bowl, but also just a lot of like normal shots, is that and I don't know how much everybody else would necessarily notice this, but is they used a super wide lens on the majority of this movie, and you notice it particularly in these shots where like it's got that hardcore fisheye effect with like Barry's head or a lot of heads in general. And so like the face swap technology is one of the things people are saying was not good, or it was noticeable in certain scenes. And I actually think that in a lot of cases that's actually the wide angle lens making one of the characters' heads bigger and making people think, because what happens with our brains is when something doesn't look totally natural, will find the easiest explanation. It's like you'll if you've ever seen, you could look at someone, if you look at like any just like normal wide angle lens footage, if you find it on social media or look it up or whatever, you'll watch it and it's easy for your brain to say like, oh, maybe this is just CGI or whatever. And so when you're watching a visual effects spectacle and you know all sorts of stuff is CGI and something doesn't look exactly natural, our brains just say, oh, that's CGI, and that's what happened there. And there's a lot of stuff in this that's practical, but they just have this lens where everything in the middle is big and everything on the edges is stretched and longer. And if you think about the most famous Flash comic panels and art and stuff, you've got these arms and legs like coming up and off. And so like I understand why they would go with that approach. And as someone who loves creative lens choices, I think it's really cool, and I love movies that play with lensing in that way, where they get the lens involved in the overall aesthetic and even the storytelling to an extent. Ironically, I also wrote why Army of the Dead looks so blurry for Screen Rant. I tend to write these like why these lenses make these movies look this way articles.
Did you blame Zach for your love of lenses when you met him?
That's why I learned all this stuff is from the being on the set of Army of the Dead, and they were talking about these lenses, and I was like, well, I guess I need to understand this in order to write about this stuff. And so I started buying these different vintage lenses, and then just like fell in love from there. But and so I know that once again, that's an aesthetic choice, and not everyone's gonna love the fact that it's a wide angle lens. But all that to say, there's a lot of stuff in this movie that looks abnormal that has nothing to do with CGI that is getting lambasted as quote unquote bad CGI because like Ezra's head will be too big or things will be warped looking. And in fact, that's really good CGI mapped onto the warping of the lens. But because he's wearing a mocap suit and the suit is probably digital in that scene where he's running, when the arm gets long and stretchy and rubber bandy, people think, that's bad CGI, not, oh, optically the lens actually would do that even if he were wearing a practical suit. So
that is one of my favorite jokes of the entire movie is when he thinks he's going to start running because of the choice that Ezra made in, I guess it would have been Zach's Justice League, in the style of almost like swimming,
or
running.
The speed skating, I think, is what inspired it.
Speed skating. Yes, it's so funny, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think we ended on a more positive note, which is good. That'll do it for our Flash spoilers. As expected, we went longer than an hour, Steven. I knew it.
Shocker.
And if we had talked about Rebel Moon, probably would have been into 2. So we're going to have to save that for another date. I should be good at this by now. Steven, you can find his written work on screenrant.com, working on Snyder Minute. I'm still pleading with you, sir, to do the last 2 parts of Zack Snyder's Justice League. I know you're doing minute by minute. You're working through BVS. It's one of my favorite podcasts when those drop, you and Mr. Dice. So you can find those there. All the Twitter, you're on Twitter if you want to follow Steven's ranting about lenses, CGI, or poor use of lighting. Your Obi-Wan rant is one of my favorites. You can follow Steven at SM Colbert. Steven, thank you so much for being on the show. Me. I will see you next week for Elemental. I did not have time to see both of them this week, so that will be the review then. And then the following week will be my most anticipated movie of the year with a review of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you on the next one.